Do not abandon your sons. It said, take out the seeds from the gourd, and preserve them with care in steaming vessels, filled with clarified water. Thus the king followed the instructions, and soon 60,000 sons were born, each as brave and proud as their father had envisioned. As the tale unfolded, Yudhishthira listened with rapt attention, his heart filled. In the kingdom of Mahabharata's race, King Sagara was renowned for his righteousness. One day a divine voice spoke to him from the sky, guiding him on a path he must follow, heeding the words. Sagara placed seeds in vessels filled with clarified butter and appointed nurses for each receptacle. His intent was to ensure the well-being of his sons. Years passed, and 60,000 powerful sons were born to Sagara. Gifted with unmeasured strength by ruler's favor, these mighty warriors roamed the earth, their cruelty and ruthlessness striking fear into the hearts of gods and harvest Rakshasas and all living beings. Their actions became so unbearable that even the gods sought refuge in Brahma, pleading for a solution. Brahma, the grandfather of all beings, prophesied that a great destruction would soon befall Sagara's sons. Due to their own misdeeds, the gods and men returned home, leaving Sagara unaware of the impending doom. As the days went by, King Sagara prepared for a grand horse sacrifice, but his prize stallion vanished. While guarded by his sons, convinced that it had been stolen, they searched far and wide, scouring the earth from cardinal points to the sea's surface. However, no matter how hard they looked, they couldn't find either the horse or its thief. Furious and heartbroken, Sagara sent his sons on another mission, commanding them to search every inch of the world. The sons down into the Essene's depths, disturbing the abode of Varuna and causing chaos among its inhabitants. As they excavated further northeastward, they finally discovered the horse roaming freely in the underworld, but their joy was short-lived, for upon seeing Kapila, a saintly being shining with splendor like a blazing fire, they ignored his presence and rushed to seize the horse. Enraged by their disrespect, Kapila shot flames that consumed Sagara's sons, reducing them to ashes. Narada, a sage who had practiced great austerities, informed Sagara of the tragic news. The king was overcome with grief for nearly an hour before remembering Siva's words. He then sent for Ansuman, his grandson, and entrusted him with a crucial task to bring back the horse and free Sagara from his suffering. As Ansuman ventured into the underworld, he encountered Kapila. Once more the saintly being revealed himself as Kapila, Vasudeva, a name revered by great sages. With reverence, Ansuman listened to Sagara's words, explaining why he had abandoned Asamanjas, his own son. Due to his cruel nature, Asamanjas was notorious for seizing and killing the weak children of townsmen. Fearing for their lives, the townspeople begged Sagara to protect them from this terror. Moved by their pleas, Sagara banished his son from the In the far-off land of ancient India, there lived a mighty king named Vajraratha. He was renowned for his unparalleled prowess with the bow and his unmatched power in battle. His presence lit up the world like a radiant sun, bringing joy to all who beheld him. But beneath this regal exterior lay a heart heavy with sorrow. Vajraratha's forefathers had been great kings, but their ambition had led them down a dark path. They had sought out the sage Kapila, only to meet their untimely doom at his hands. Their souls were trapped between worlds, unable to reach the realm of the gods. Vajraratha, filled with remorse and longing, knew he had to make amends. He entrusted his kingdom to his trusted minister and set out on a journey to the majestic Himalayas. The king's intention was to practice austerities, seeking purification for his family's sins and the favor of the goddess Ganga. As he ascended the mountain, the landscape unfolded before him like a tapestry woven by the gods. The snowy peak stretched towards the sky, its rugged beauty breathtaking. Vajraratha marveled at the diverse peaks, some shining like gold, others gleaming silver or dark as collyrium. The air was alive with the songs of birds. Vringarajas, Gandhir's dewas and watercocks filled the air with their melodies. Cranes added to the symphony, while kinnaras and celestial nymphs sat serenely on the mountain stony slabs. As he wandered through this enchanted realm, Vajraratha came across elephants that had roamed the cardinal points, leaving behind a trail of uprooted trees. Demigods from the Vidyad era last frequented the hill, and snakes with glowing tongues hissed in the shadows. The mountain was a treasure trove of gems, but also home to deadly serpents. Vajraratha's heart swelled with devotion as he gazed upon this wondrous landscape. He renounced his worldly desires and embarked on an austere life, surviving on nothing but water, fruit, and roots. For 1,000 years, the gods themselves would have been hard-pressed to endure such penance. When the appointed time arrived, Ganga, the goddess of rivers, took on a material form. Her divine presence illuminated the mountain, and Bhagirath's eyes met hers in a moment of profound connection. "O great king," she said, "what is it that you desire from me? What boon do you seek?" Bhagirath poured out his heart to Ganga, recounting the tale of his forefathers' untimely demise and their inability to reach the realm of the gods. He begged her to bestow upon them salvation by sprinkling her sacred waters over their mortal remains. Ganga's response was both kind and firm. In the realm of ancient India, a legendary tale unfolded, one that would be etched in the annals of time. It began with Bhagiratha, a king who had heard the story of his ancestors' tragic fate. Their bodies, those of mighty Sagara's sons, lay scattered on the earth awaiting redemption. Moved by compassion and devotion, Bhagiratha sought to bring solace to their soul. She approached the great god Shiva, who dwelled in the snowy mountain ranges. Lomasa, a wise sage, had informed the king about Shiva's willingness to help him. The king's heart was filled with hope as he stood before the mighty god, a most righteous of the protectors of men. Shiva addressed Bhagiratha, "I shall sustain the river of the gods when she takes her descent from the sky." With these words, Shiva descended from his mountain, about accompanied by his attendants, their weapons at the ready. Bhagiratha's devotion was kindled as he listened to Shiva's promise. He made obeisance and directed his thoughts towards Ganga, the river of the gods. As if responding to the king's longing, Ganga began to stir in the heavens. Her waters, pure and divine, started to flow towards the earth, drawn by Bhagiratha's heartfelt prayer. The descent of Ganga was a spectacle unlike any other. She fell from the sky, her whirlpools raging, teeming with fishes and sharks, as she flowed across the land. Her waters separated into 3 streams, each one unique in its own right. One stream rushed towards the sea, while the others flowed through the mountains and valleys. Ganga's waters were like a woman, drunk, stumbling and staggering as they made their way to their destination. As Ganga reached the surface of the earth, she spoke to Bhagiratha in a voice that echoed across the land, "The great king, show me the path that I shall have to take." Bhagiratha's heart swelled with joy as he guided Ganga towards the spot where his ancestors' bodies lay. The river, now a symbol of purification and redemption, flooded the earth, washing away the impurities of the past. With her task accomplished, Shiva returned to his mountain, about accompanied by the celestial beings. Bhagiratha, accompanied by Ganga, reached the sea, which was quickly filled with the river's waters. The king adopted Ganga as a daughter and offered libations of water to the names of his forefathers, thus fulfilling his heart's wish. Thus the tale of Ganga's descent from heaven to earth was etched in the annals of time. It was a testament to the power of devotion and compassion, a reminder that even the most impossible tasks can be achieved with faith and determination. The sun was setting over the vast expanse of the Himalayas as Arjuna, the son of Kunti, made his way slowly towards the confluence of the 2 rivers, Nanda and Aparnanda. These rivers were said to possess the power to destroy the fear of sin that dwelled within a person's heart. As he walked, the air grew thick with an otherworldly energy, and Arjuna felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. As he reached the peak of Himakuta, a strange and wondrous sight unfolded before him. The mere utterance of words was enough to summon forth a gathering of clouds, which in turn unleashed a torrent of stones upon the hillside. People who dared to approach the mountain were struck with sorrow, as if their very souls had been pierced by an unseen force. The winds howled and whistled through the valleys, carrying with them the scent of rain and ozone. The skies themselves seemed to weep tears of water, pouring down a relentless deluge upon the land. And yet amidst this turmoil, Arjuna could have sworn that he heard the faint whisper of sacred words being recited in the distant scene. Betrayed by these strange occurrences, Arjuna turned to his wise friend Lomasa and asked for an explanation. Lomasa began to recount a tale from ancient times, a story of a great saint who had once dwelled upon this very mountain peak. This was the abode of Rishabha, Lomasa said, a sage whose life spanned many centuries. He was a man consumed by his own wrath and anger, and he vowed that anyone who dared to speak on this mountain would be met with a storm of stones. And when this Lomasa spoke, Arjuna's eyes widened in wonder. He had heard stories of the gods themselves having been forced to abandon their celestial abodes due to the saints' curses. The mountain peak was said to be inaccessible to mortal men unless they had first cleansed their souls through a life of penance and devotion. Lomasa continued his tale, speaking of Rishasriya, a mighty son of Kisippa, who had been born of a celestial nymph. This young sage had grown up in the forest, surrounded by the whispers of the trees, and the songs of the birds. His horns shone like gold in the sunlight, and his very presence seemed to command the respect of even the gods themselves. But Rishasringa's greatest feat was yet to come as a ruler. Lomapeda had once been guilty of a falsehood towards a Brahmana, and as a result, he had lost the favor of the priestly class. His people suffered under the drought that followed, and they begged him to find a way to appease the gods. It was then that Rishasriya was summoned to Lolapeda's court, where he revealed himself. In the verdant landscape of ancient India, a cunning plan was set in motion by a skilled courtesan sent by the clever and determined Queen Sita. Her mission was to entice Rishasringa, the son of sage Vivandika, into her arms, using every trick in the book to win his heart. The courtesan's floating hermitage, adorned with artificial trees, colorful flowers, and luscious fruits, was a marvel to behold. She moored it near the hermitage of Rishasringa, sending emissaries to survey the area. Before making her move, the opportunity presented itself, and she dispatched her daughter, a courtesan by trade and wit, to befriend the young sages. The courtesan approached Rishasringa's hermitage. She was greeted with warmth and hospitality by the saintly son of Vivandik. "I hope all is well with you, O Singh," she said, "and that you have a plentiful store of fruits and roots to sustain you in your spiritual pursuits." Her words were laced with flattery as she hoped to win his trust. Rishasringa, taken aback by the courtesan's beauty and charm, welcomed her into his home. He offered her water for washing her feet, fruits and roots, following the dictates of his faith. But the courtesan had no intention of partaking in such simple pleasures. Instead, she threw aside the edible offerings and presented Rishasringa with exquisite garlands, shimmering garments, and fine drinks. As the courtesan's gifts overwhelmed Rishasringa, he became increasingly enamored with her. She played with the ball, longing and enjoying herself as if she were a carefree child. Her touch sent shivers down his spine, and she repeatedly clasped him in her arms, leaving him breathless. The courtesan's plan was working like magic. Rishasringa's heart was now captivated by her charms, and he seemed lost to the world around him. But just as it seemed that all was one, Vivandika, the wise and fire sage, appeared on the scene. He saw his son sitting alone, pensive and sad, with a look of longing in his eyes. "And what's wrong?" Vivandika asked, concern etched on his face. "Why are you not tending to your duties? Have you performed the ceremony of burnt offering today?" Rishasringa looked up at his father, his eyes still fixed on the memory of the courtesan who had vanished into thin air, leaving him heartbroken and bewildered. As Vivandika's words washed over him, Rishasringa's gaze snapped back to reality. He knew he was lost in thought, and a hint of shame crept onto his face. The young sage's world. In the midst of a serene forest, Rishasringa sat in contemplation, his senses heightened as he awaited the arrival of a spiritual seeker. Suddenly a young man with an aura of divinity appeared before him. The youth's presence was like a gentle breeze rustling through a verdant forest, awaking all the senses. As the young man approached, Rishasringa beheld the vision of loveliness. His hair, a rich blue-black hue, cascaded down his back in perfect waves, fragrant with the scent of sandalwood. The youth's eyes sparkled like lotus petals, shining brightly as he moved with an effortless elegance that belied his slender waist and navel. Around his neck a glittering ornament shone like lightning on a clear sky, while his wrists held delicate rosaries that jingled softly as he walked. The young man's garments were woven from threads of fine silk, shimmering in the sunlight like the gentle lapping of waves on a tranquil lake. His face was a masterpiece of beauty, radiant with an inner light that seemed almost otherworldly. As he spoke, his voice was like music, soothing and melodious as the song of a male blackbird. Rishasringa felt his heart stir within him, touched by the youth's presence in a way he had never experienced before. The old sage watched entranced as the young man played with the glubber fruit on his palm, its movements a blur of color and light as it seemed to leap and bound across the ground. As their eyes met, Rishasringa felt an overwhelming sense of joy and wonder. He saw in this youth a kindred spirit, one who embodied the very essence of devotion and spiritual practice. The young man's words were like honeyed nectar, sweet and soothing, as he spoke of his penances and observances. As they sat together, Rishasringa felt his senses come alive, drinking in the beauty and wonder of this extraordinary youth. He offered him fruits from his own garden, but the young man declined, preferring to share with him instead a basket of fragrant, endless fruit that burst with flavor on Rishasringa's tongue. The old sage was amazed by the youth's gift A garland of flowers woven with silken threads it sent intoxicating, and alluring as he watched the young man depart. For his hermitage Rishathring felt a pang in his heart, as if his very soul were being torn apart. Father, he cried out to the forest itself, let me go to him at once. I must follow this noble youth and learn from him the secrets of his devotion. My heart yearns for the same observances, the same penances that bring him so close to the divine. And with that Rishathring arose from his seat, his determination burning bright. In a dense forest Vivandik, a wise and powerful sage, dwelled in his hermitage with his young son Rishathring. One day, while Vivandika was out gathering fruits, the boy encountered a beautiful courtesan who tried to allure him with sweet words and enticing gifts. But Rishathring, despite being just a child, was not swayed by her charms. The courtesan, however, was not one to give up easily. She had a wicked design in mind, and with cunning managed to lure Rishathring into her boat. As the boy sailed away with her, Vivandika returned home frantic with worry. He searched for his son everywhere, but couldn't find him. Days turned into weeks, and Vivandika's anxiety grew. He finally returned to his hermitage, still searching for any sign of his missing child. Meanwhile, Rishathring was enjoying the courtesan's company on the river, unaware of the danger that lay ahead. As fate would have it, the courtesan took Rishathring to the kingdom of Anga, where he was received with great honor by its king. The king was so taken by Rishathring's charm and wisdom that he decided to give his daughter Sadak in marriage to the young sage. To appease Vivandika's wrath, the king ordered his subjects to prepare a grand welcome for him. When Vivandika finally arrived at the hermitage, he was met with an unexpected sight. His son Rishathring, now grown and married, living a life of luxury in the palace. The saint's anger and suspicion gave way to joy and wonder as he saw the prosperity and happiness that had been bestowed upon him. As Vivandika spent more time at the king's court, he was treated with great hospitality by the cowards who tended to his son's cattle. They told him that the wealth and resources belonged to Rishathring, and Vivandika's heart swelled with pride. He finally understood that his son had been taken care of all along. Moved by gratitude, Vivandika expressed his admiration for the king and his people. He then instructed Rishathring to return to their hermitage as soon as a new child was born in the palace, so that he could perform his duties as a father. And so Rishathring returned to his father's side, accompanied by his loving wife Sada, who remained devoted to him like a faithful star. Years passed, and Rishathring lived a life of simplicity and devotion with his family in the hermitage. The place became renowned for its spiritual significance, and people would come from far and wide to seek blessings and purification there. And as they did, Vivandika's wise words echoed through the ages. As soon as a son is born, as the sun rose over the horizon, Yudhishthira, son of Pandu, began his sacred journey along the banks of the river Kozakai. With each step, he drew closer to the revered shrines, seeking spiritual purification and enlightenment. The gentle breeze carried the whispers of ancient wisdom as he made his way to the confluence of the Ganga River with the vastest sea. And as they reached the sea, Yudhishthira performed a sacred plunge in its waters, surrounded by the tranquil presence of 500 rivers. His brothers Arjuna and Bhima stood by his side, their eyes fixed on the horizon as they gazed out at the endless expanse of the scene. The prince's resolve was strengthened with each passing moment, for he knew that this journey would test his courage and faith. Amasa, the sage and guide, approached Yudhishthira and spoke words of wisdom. This land where the Kalinga tribes dwell is blessed by the gods. The river Vaitarani flows through it, carrying the prayers of the faithful to the heavens above. As he spoke, Lomasa led them towards the sacred site where the god Rudra had once seized the sacrificial beast, only to be reminded by the gods to respect the property of others. The memory of that ancient tale was etched in the minds of all who stood there. The gods themselves had cautioned Rudra against coveting what did not belong to him. With reverence they offered a sacrifice and appeased his wrath, and so the god gave up the beast and vanished into the realm of the Divinyas. Yudhishthira and his companions reached the river Vaitarani. They descended to its banks and made offerings to their ancestors. The prince's heart swelled with emotion as he reflected on the power of a pious deed. How great must be the force of a righteous act! He exclaimed, feeling himself transported to realms beyond mortal comprehension. Lomasa smiled knowingly, for he had led them to a place where the very fabric of reality was. Then the sounds of chanting and prayers echoed through the air, carrying on the wind from a distance of 300,000 yotunas away. Yudhishthira's eyes widened in awe as he beheld the divine. Forced of the self-existent one, Herr Viswakarma at once performed a grand sacrifice, and the self-existent one had bestowed upon Kasyapa the entire earth as a gift. But when the goddess Earth was given away, she became despondent and wrathful, fearing that her fate would be sealed in the netherworld. Moved by her plight, Kasyapa performed a propitiatory act to appease her anger. As they stood on this sacred site, Lomasa revealed its hidden significance. The spot itself was an altar manifesting the form of a sacred structure that, in the realm of ancient India, Vajrayana shared a tale of great significance with King Yudhishthira and his brothers. It was a story that spoke of the revered Parashurama, a sage of unparalleled power and wisdom. Parashurama's journey to the sacred land had been foreseen by Rama himself, who possessed the ability to know all things spontaneously. The fourth day of the lunar cycle was approaching, and it was on this very night that Rama would reveal himself to those assembled at the site. Vana, a devoted follower of Parashurama, described the saint Vajrayana. On the morrow, at the end of this very night, there will set in the fourth day of the lunar course. On that occasion, thou wilt have a sight of him clad in a civil deerskin and wearing his hair in the form of a matted mass. As the tale unfolded, Yudhishthira requested Vana to recount the legend of Parashurama's triumph over Kartaviriya's son Arjuna. This mighty king with 1,000 arms in a celestial car made of gold had grown powerful beyond measure and oppressed all living beings. The gods themselves had deemed it necessary for Rama to vanquish this tyrant. In the heart of the Vedari forced a great monarch named Gadai dwelled in penance. His daughter Satyavati was born to him, and when she came of age, Richeka, the son of Pruyu, requested her hand in marriage. However, Gadai stipulated that his daughter's suitor must provide a dowry of 1,000 fleet steeds with single black ears. Richeka agreed to this condition, but Varuna, the god of the sea, ultimately gifted him the required horses. The union between Satyavati and Richeka was blessed by the gods themselves. When Pruyu, her father-in-law, arrived for their wedding celebration, he granted his daughter-in-law a boon. She could ask for anything she desired. With her mother's encouragement, Satyavati requested that her son be born with the character of a warrior and not as a priestly man. Pruyu, pleased by her devotion, agreed to grant this wish. He provided them with 2 pots of rice and milk infused with divine essence, instructing them to bow during their season and separately embrace specific trees while consuming the prepared food. However, Satyavati's mother secretly switched the pots and trees, leading Pruyu to realize that his daughter-in-law had taken the wrong pie rice and embraced the wrong tree. Pruyu foretold that a son would be born to Satyavati with the character of a warrior, while her mother would give birth to a mighty son who would follow the path of righteousness. Moved in the dense forests of ancient India, a renowned sage named Jamadagni dwelled in a humble hermitage with his devoted wife Renuka, austerely dedicated to the study of the Veda and sacred penances. Jamadagni's name echoed throughout the land. As a testament to his unyielding devotion, his wife Renuka was equally pious, living a life of purity and simplicity. Together they had 5 sons, 4 elder brothers, and a youngest son named Rama, who would prove to be exceptional in every way. One day, while the family's sons were out gathering fruits, Renuka went for a bath, her heart pure and chaste as ever. However, upon returning home, she inadvertently cast a glance at King Chitraratha Martakavita, whose majestic form left an indelible mark on her mind. A fleeting moment of attraction ignited an unlawful desire within her, leaving her tainted by the waters of the river. Upon discovering his wife's transgression, Jamadagni was consumed by rage and disappointment. He summoned their eldest son Rumanbin, followed by Sashana, Vasaviswavisu, and finally Rama. With a stern expression, he instructed each of them to end their mother's life. But they were paralyzed with fear and unable to utter a word. Jamadagni's ire only intensified as he cursed his sons, rendering them senseless and leaving them motionless like inanimate objects. Rama, the youngest son, arrived at the hermitage last and was met with his father's stern command: "Kill this wicked mother of thine without compunction, O my son." With an axe in hand, Rama bravely severed his mother's head. The wrath of Jamadagni subsided instantly as he expressed his approval, saying, "Thou hast performed at my bidding this difficult task." Being versed in virtue, Rama then requested that his mother be restored to life, and that he might not be haunted by the memory of this cruel deed. He also wished for his brothers to regain their former state, to become unrivaled on the battlefield, and to possess long life. Jamadagni granted all these desires, demonstrating his boundless love, and devotion in time. However, a new challenge emerged when the valiant son of Kartavirya, Arjuna, arrived at the hermitage. He had been invited by Renuka, but was not pleased with the reception he received with arrogance in his heart. He seized the sacred cow that provided milk for the Vedic rituals, and began to ravage. The forest Rama returned home to find his father recounting the events that transpired while he was away. Upon seeing the distressed cow lowing for its calf, Rama's heart swelled with resentment. He rushed towards Arjuna, whose life had already been. The forest echoed with Rama's anguished cries as he mourned the loss of his father Dasharatha. Like a stag caught in the woods, his father had been struck down by the sons of Kartavirya, those ruthless warriors who had no regard for virtue or compassion. Rama's words poured out like a river lamenting the fate that had befallen his father, an elderly man, aged in penance, and far removed from violence. As he spoke, his grief gave way to righteous indignation. How could such men claim to have slain an unarmed and defenseless soul? What face would they show their friends and servants when speaking of this deed? Rama's words dripped with venom as he vowed to avenge his father's death. The blame lay not with the sons of Kartavirya, but with himself for failing to protect his father. With a heavy heart, Rama performed the funeral rites for his departed sire. He built a pyre and cremated his father's body, watching as the flames consumed the mortal remains. As the fire raged on, Rama took up his sword, its blade gleaming with an inner light. With a fierce cry, he charged into battle, determined to vanquish the sons of Kartavirya. A clash of steel on steel echoed through the forest as Rama fought single-handedly against the warriors. His sword sliced through their ranks, leaving none standing. 3 times he struck down the Kshatriyas who followed the sons of Kartavirya, and 7 times he exterminated entire tribes of warriors. The earth ran red with blood in the tract known as Samatvancheka, where 5 lakes of crimson flowed as Rama stood victorious over his fallen foes. Richak, a sage from the Prave clan, appeared to him in a vision. The sage's words offered counsel and guidance, urging Rama to temper his wrath with compassion. Rama heeded these words, for he knew the true strength lay not in violence, but in self-control. With his anger spent, Rama turned to more noble pursuits. He built an altar of gold 10 vimas broad and 9 high, and presented it as a gift to the wise Kasyapa. The Brahmanas divided this altar into shares, earning them the name Kandevayamas as a token of his respect. For these priests, Rama bestowed the earth upon Kasyapa, entrusting him with its Karma's journey. Did not end there. He became engaged in an austere penance, dwelling in the Mahendra hills, where he remained lost to the world. His presence was felt throughout the land. However, as his legion grew, those who dwelled on earth knew Rama as a force to be reckoned with, a conqueror of hostile cities and a son of the great Frey Planus. The moon reached its 14th day as Yudhishthira, the wise and just king, embarked on his sacred journey. He was accompanied by his younger brothers and the divine Krishna. Their destination was a series of holy bathing spots along the coast of the sea, each one more revered than the last. At these sacred places, the king and his companions would take their baths, offer libations to their ancestors and the gods, and distribute riches to the esteemed leaders of the twice-born classes. They journeyed on. They reached the majestic Godavari river, which flowed directly into the sea. It was here that Yudhishthira was cleansed of his sins, a moment of great spiritual significance for him. Continuing their pilgrimage, they arrived at the sacred spot known as Agastya's name, where the air was thick with an otherworldly purity. Krishna and the king bathed in these holy spots, and it was here that Krishna told them the tale of Arjuna's incredible feat, a story so extraordinary that even the gods were said to be amazed by its grandeur. The king and his companions listened with rapt attention as Krishna recounted the exploits of their brother Arjunas. They spent more time in this sacred place. Yudhishthira gave away thousands of cows to those who dwelled along the coast, spreading joy and prosperity wherever he went. He and his brothers also shared stories of how Arjuna had made a remarkable gift of kind, further solidifying their bond with the divine. Their journey next took them to the forest, where the deities themselves had once practiced asceticism and virtuous rulers had performed sacred rites. It was here that Yudhishthira beheld the magnificent altar of Rikakasana, a place fit for worship by those who lived virtuous lives. The king also caught sight of the numerous shrines dedicated to various gods, including Indra, Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. As he wandered through these sacred precincts, Yudhishthira observed the many fasts that were being kept and offered large quantities of gems as gifts. He immersed himself in all the holy spots, seeking spiritual rejuvenation and purification eventually. He made his way back to Sapareka, where he was greeted by the sea's gentle waves. The king then proceeded to Prahasa, a place renowned for its sacredness. Throughout the world, there Yudhishthira washed himself with his brothers, offered libations to their ancestors and the celestial hosts, just as Krishna and Lomasa did alongside him. For 12 days he subsisted solely on air and water, engaging in acts of asceticism. As news of the king's penances reached Valarama and Krishna, they hastened to his side with troops at their command. Upon arriving, they were met with a poignant sight. Yudhishthira and his brothers. The sun was setting over the sacred spot of Prahasa, a holy landing place on the coast of the sea. The Vrishas had arrived, led by Valarama, who wore a wreath made of wild flowers and carried a plowshare as his arms. They surrounded the sons of Pandu, who were waiting upon them with great respect. They stood together. Valarama turned to Krishna and spoke in a voice filled with concern. Krishna, I do not see that virtue leads to any good, or the unrighteous practices can cause evil. He said, look at Yudhishthira, the mighty one who has been reduced to living in the woods, wearing the bark of trees as his garment and matted hair on his head. And Duryodhana, the wicked one, rules over the earth with no consequences for his actions. Balarama's words were laced with doubt and confusion. What should people do when they see such a contrast between virtue and vice? He asked, here is Yudhishthira, who has given up his kingdom and pleasures to follow the righteous path, yet lives in misery, and Bhishma, Kripa, Drona, and other great leaders live happily after banishing the sons of Prithas. Valarama spoke. He gazed at the emaciated form of Bhima, who was suffering from hunger and thirst. This powerful hero, he said, who can conquer single-handedly all the rulers of men in the east, is now leading a wretched life in the woods. He looked at Sahadeva, Nakula, and Arjuna, each of whom had given up their royal lives to follow Yudhishthira into exile. Valarama's words were filled with sorrow and regret. The earth does not seem to be punishing Duryodhana for his wicked deeds. He said, why did the earth not swallow him whole when he banished Yudhishthira, who had all his weapons of war and was accompanied by his brothers? He shook his head in dismay as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the scene. Valarama's words hung in the air like a challenge. The Vrishas and the sons of Pandu stood together, each lost in their own thoughts about the contrast between virtue and vice, and the fate that had befallen them all. In the silence that followed, Krishna listened intently to Valarama's words, his eyes filled with compassion for his friends who were suffering. He knew that the path of righteousness was not always easy, but he also knew that it was the only way to true happiness and fulfillment. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Krishna nodded his head in understanding, and the Vrishas and the sons of Pandu. The sun had just begun to set on the sacred land of Hastinapur, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets. Satyaki, a valorous warrior and loyal friend of the Pandavas, stood before Rama, his eyes ablaze with determination. O Rama, he exclaimed, this is not the time for lamentation. We must act now while the situation allows it. Satyaka's words echoed through the air as he addressed Rama, who listened intently to his proposal. The Pandavas had been forced into exile, and their rightful place on the throne of Hastinapura was being usurped by Dhritarashtra's sons. Satyaki argued that with Krishna and himself at their side, the Pandavas' chances of reclaiming their kingdom were all but certainless. He spoke, his eyes locked onto Rama's, burning with a fire's inner light. We have patrons who can protect us, he declared, patrons like you and Krishna, who are capable of defending the entire world. How is it that Arjuna, your son, remains in hiding with his brothers? It is time for action. Let us march out into battle armed to the teeth and crush our enemies beneath our feet. Satyaki's words were met with a resounding agreement from Rama, who nodded his head in approval. Krishna, he said, this is your chance to prove yourself as the great warrior you are. Take up your bow and let us show Dhritarashtra's sons the true meaning of power. But just as the conversation was heating up, Krishna intervened, his voice calm and measured. Ocean of Mada's race, he said to Satyaki, your words are indeed true, but we must consider the will of Yudhishthira, our noble king. He would not accept the throne unless it were won through his own bravery. Satyaki listened intently as Krishna continued, besides, we have Bhima and Arjuna two mighty warriors who are unmatched in battle, and with the twins, Necula and Sahadeva by their side, what chance do our enemies stand? We must not underestimate the prowess of our opponents, but we also cannot afford to wait. Krishna's words were met with a nod from Satyaki, who understood the gravity of the situation. I see, he said, then let us proceed with caution and straight. Let us prepare for battle, but also remain vigilant and adapt to changing circumstances. As the conversation came to a close, the two friends shared a moment of mutual respect and understanding. They knew that their words would shape the course of his story, and they were determined to see justice prevail. With a final farewell, Satyaki and Krishna parted ways, with Rama returning to their respective homes. The Pandavas continued on. In the sacred land of ancient India, a magnificent tale unfolded, one that spoke of devotion, sacrifice, and the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. It was said that in a bygone era, King Nriga had performed a grand sacrifice here, one that pleased the mighty Indra, the thunderbolt-wielding god, who demolished hostile cities. The king's offering of some joyous sacred elixir revitalized Indra and filled his heart with joy. As the gods and goddesses, including Indra, gathered to celebrate this momentous occasion, they were joined by the protectors of all living beings. Together, they performed various sacrifices on an unprecedented scale, showering copious gratuities upon the minister and priests who had facilitated these rituals. King Amartayasa, a mighty ruler, followed in Nriga's footsteps, satisfying Indra with his own offering of some choice during 7 horse sacrifices. In this grand spectacle, even the articles used in the ritual were crafted from gold, a testament to the king's boundless generosity. The story was told by Lomasa, a revered sage who spoke to King Yudhishthira about the virtues of this sacred land. He recounted how Gaia, the protector of the earth, had performed 7 magnificent sacrifices, where Indra was delighted by drinking some juice, and the priests were rewarded with untold wealth beyond counting. The king's largesse knew no bounds, for even the images of the goddess of speech, crafted from gold, were given as gifts to the sacerdotal caste who had arrived from all corners of the land. As Lomasa continued his tale, he spoke of Gaia's ultimate goal, to attain the regions of Indra. To achieve this, he had erected countless sacrificial piles at various spots, leaving barely any space on the earth's surface, and so it was said that whoever bathed in the sacred river Payosnai would follow in Gaia's footsteps and reach the realms of the gods. Yudhishthira, along with his brothers, was deeply moved by this narrative. They decided to perform ablutions in the Payosnai river, seeking to wash away their own sins. As they journeyed to the Hill of Sapphires and the great river Narmada, Lomasa guided them through the sacred sites and shrines of the celestial realm. As they explored these hallowed grounds, Yudhishthira asked Lomasa about the history of this land. The sage began to recount a tale from a bygone era, one that spoke of Satyati's sacrificial rites, where Indra appeared in a visible form and drank some juice alongside 2 celestial physicians. However, Bhrigu's son Chivana conceived anger towards Indra for his perceived transgressions. Yudhishthira was intrigued by this story and asked Lomasa, in the tranquil surroundings of a serene lake, a great saint named Bhrigu's son Chivana had been practicing intense austerities for an extended period. His resplendent form and mighty energy were evident as he assumed the vira posture, remaining motionless like an inanimate. Time passed, and his body was transformed into an anthill covered with creepers. Swarms of ants enveloped him, making him appear as nothing more than a heap of earth. As the seasons changed, a ruler named Satyati, along with 4,000 wives and his only daughter Sukanya, visited this picturesque lake for amusement. Sukanya, surrounded by her maids and adorned with celestial jewels, strolled about, taking in the beauty of the surroundings. Her eyes sparkled as she wandered through the forest, breaking twigs from blossoming trees. Unaware of her surroundings, she moved with the carefree abandon of lightning. For his son, now an anthill, observed Sukanya's innocent yet alluring nature. His intelligence and ascetic energy were stirred by her presence, and he felt a surge of desire. However, his low voice called out to her, but she did not hear him. Curious and losing her senses, Sukanya pierced the eyes of the Rishi with thorns, causing him immense pain and wrath. As Chivana's anger grew, he obstructed the calls of nature, for Satyati's forces, leaving them greatly afflicted. The king, perplexed by this turn of events, asked his soldiers if they knew who was responsible For the disturbance they replied that they did not know, and it was up to the king to investigate further. Saryatai determined to resolve the issue, used both menace and conciliation to gather information from his friends. However, none of them had any knowledge about the matter, seeing the distress caused by Chayavana's obstruction. Sukanya finally confessed to her father that she had pierced a brilliant substance in the anthill with thorns. Hearing Sukanya's explanation, Saryatai immediately came to the anthill and found Grahu's son aged and worn from his austerities. The king with joined hands besought Chayavana for forgiveness, acknowledging that his daughter had acted out of ignorance and temptation. Moved by the king's sincerity, Chayavana agreed to forgive Sukanya on one condition: he would take her as his bride. Hearing Chayavana's words, Saryatai, without hesitation, bestowed his daughter upon the high-souled Rishi with Sukanya. Now under his care, Chayavana was pleased with the king and granted him his blessings. Accompanied by his troops, Saryatai returned to his city, while Sukanya began to tend her husband, practicing penances and observing the ordinances as time passed. Sukanya proved herself to be a devoted wife, worshipping She. In a lush forest where the sun's rays danced across the trees, the twin Aswin celestial physicians of great renown chanced upon a vision of loveliness. Sukanya, daughter of Saryatai and wife of Chayavana, had just emerged from her bath, her skin glistening with dew-kissed radiance. The Aswin's eyes widened as they beheld her, their faces aglow with wonder. "Who are you, fair one?" asked the nose-born twins in unison, their voices like gentle breezes on a summer's day. "Your beauty shines brighter than the stars in the celestial realm itself." Sukanya blushed at their words, her bashfulness a testament to her innocence and virtue. The Aswins continued to praise her charms, likening her to a lightning bolt that illuminated the forest with its radiant glow. Yet they noted that her natural beauty was eclipsed by the mud and dirt that clung to her skin. "Why do you serve an old man like Chayavana?" they asked, their words tinged with a hint of disapproval, "when one of us could provide for your needs and bring you joy." Sukanya's heart swelled with devotion as she replied, "I am committed to my husband Chayavana. I do not doubt his fidelity." The Aswins, undeterred by her words, proposed a solution. They would restore Chayavana's youth and vitality, making him strong and handsome once more. In return, Sukanya would choose one of them as her partner, with the Aswin's promise ringing in her ears. Sukanya returned to Chayavana and shared their proposal with him. Her husband, eager to regain his former vigor, gave his consent. The Aswins instructed Sukanya to bring Chayavana to a nearby tank, where they would perform their magical ritual as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in a warm orange glow. Chayavana and the twin Aswins descended into the water. The air was filled with an expectant hush as they submerged beneath the surface. A moment later, they emerged transformed, youthful, radiant, and adorned with burnished earrings that sparkled like stars. Sukanya's heart swelled with joy as she beheld her husband's restored beauty. Yet in their identical forms, it was impossible for her to choose between them. The Aswins, amused by her predicament, encouraged her to select the one who pleased her fancy. Sukanya's eyes scanned the three figures before her, and finally her gaze settled on her beloved Chayavana. Overjoyed at being reunited with his youthful form and devoted wife, Chayavana thanked the Aswins for their gift. He promised to repay them by making them coiffeurs of summit joys in the presence of the Lord of Celestials himself. With hearts full of gratitude, the twins ascended to, in the tranquil hermitage of the revered Grahu's son Chayavana, a remarkable tale unfolded. The news of Chayavana's transformation into an eternally youthful person had reached Saryatai, the ruler of earth, who was overjoyed and, accompanied by his troops, arrived at the hermitage. Upon seeing Chayavana and Sukanya, like two celestial children, Saryatai and his wife were filled with immense delight, their joy rivaling that of conquering the entire world. As they entered the hermitage, Chayavana's son was received honorably by the saint. The king, seated near the ascetic, engaged in a delightful conversation of an auspicious kind. Grahu's son then proposed to officiate at a sacred ceremony for Saryatai, and the ruler of earth experienced a height of joy, expressing his approval of the proposal. On an auspicious day, suitable for the commencement of a sacrificial ceremony, Saryatai ordered the erection of a magnificent shrine splendidly furnished with all desirable things. Chayavana, as the king's priest, took up a quantity of some juice to offer it to the Aswins, who were celestial physicians. However, Indra, the Lord of Celestials, pronounced his interdiction, stating that the Aswins had no right to receive an offering of the summit. Jusik Kevana countered Indra's words, saying, "These two are of mighty enterprise, possessed of mighty souls, and uncommonly endued with beauty and grace, and they, O Indra, have converted me into an eternally youthful person, even like unto a celestial. Why shouldst thou and the other celestials have a right to the distilled sum?" Jews and not they at this Indra spoke again, saying that the Aswins were but servants who practiced the healing art, and deterred by Indra's words, Chavana took up the offering. He had intended to make, however, as he was about to take up an excellent portion of the sum, Jews Indra observed his act, and thus spoke unto him, If thou take up the sum with a view to offering it to those celestials, I shall hurl at thee my thunderbolt of awful form, which is superior to all the weapons that exist. Chavana cast a smelling glance at Indra, and took up a goodly quantity of the sum. Jusindra then hurled his thunderbolt at Chavana. But the saint's arm was paralyzed by Phrygius. Having paralyzed Indra's arm, Chavana recited sacred hymns and made an offering on the fire. With this he gained his object and attempted to destroy the celestial deity. As a result of Chavana's acidic energy, a huge demon named Mada came into being with Gekindit. In the realm of the gods, Indra, the mighty lord of the celestial forces, stood trembling with fear before him. Loomed the demon Mada, its mind as frightening as that of the god of death. Himself, Indra's own arms were paralyzed, unable to defend himself against the demon's intentions to devour him whole. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Indra repeatedly licked the corners of his mouth, his fear and anxiety. Palpable just, when all hope seemed lost, Chavana, the wise and powerful son of Pryu, appeared on the scene. Indra, tortured by fright, implored Chavana's mercy, begging him to intervene on his behalf. O Prigu's son, Indra cried, I tell you as truth itself that from this day forward the two Aswins will be entitled to the sum of Jews. Be merciful to me. My undertaking can never come to naught. Chavana, with a quickening of his wrath, was appeased by Indra's words, and set free the demolisher of hostile cities. He then cast down the demon Meda, banishing it from the realm of the gods. With a wave of his hand, Chavana distributed Meda, dispersing its influence throughout the world in various forms. Intoxication, when in gambling and field sports. As the demon was vanquished, Indra's gratitude knew no bounds. He offered Chavana a summon, draught, which he gratefully accepted. Together with King Saryatite, they worshipped all the gods, including the two Aswins, who were now entitled to drink the sacred juice. The fame of Chavana's power spread far and wide, and Indra's own reputation was enhanced by his association with the wise sages. The days past, Chavana lived a life of happiness in the woods, surrounded by his loving wife, Sukanya. He spent his time offering libations to his forefathers and the gods at the sacred lake, where birds sang sweet melodies. The king, along with his brothers, was invited to visit this holy site, where they would offer water to their ancestors, and the gods. The Arctic hill, a place of great sanctity, stood nearby. This was no ordinary hill, for it was here that the gods and sages had dwelled in ancient times, carrying out austere penances. The twins Nara and Narayana, as well as the mighty saints Santanu and Sanika, had all attained eternal regions from this very spot. Even the great Krisha, son of Pandu, had engaged himself in a life of penance. Here is Yudhishthira. The king stood before this sacred site. He was reminded of his own duties. As a ruler, he was told that this place held the power to destroy all sins, and that it was an excellent spot for offering. In the court of Yudhishthira, the great king asked Lomasa to narrate the story of Mandhata, the mighty monarch who rivaled Indra himself in splendor. Lomasa began by recounting the birth of Mandhata, son of Yuvanaswa, a virtuous king from the Ikshvaka dynasty. Yuvanaswa had performed numerous sacrifices and made generous gifts to the priests, but despite his good deeds, he was childless. He handed over the duties of state to his ministers and devoted himself to spiritual pursuits. In the woods one day, while observing a fast, Yuvanaswa entered the hermitage of Pryu, where a sacred jar filled with water had been placed. The water was infused with the virtue of the saints' prayers, intended to bring forth a son of great strength and valor. As Yuvanaswa drank from the jar, he unknowingly disrupted the plan of the saints. They awoke to find the water gone and questioned Yuvanaswa about its disappearance. He truthfully confessed to drinking it, and Prayu's son revealed that the water was meant for his mother to conceive a son who would rival Indra himself. Despite this mishap, the saints performed a sacrifice to ensure the birth of Mandhata. 100 years passed before Yuvanaswa gave birth to a son shining like the sun with mighty strength and unmeasured luster. The boy was named Mandhata. As he would suck Indra's fingers, Mandhata grew. He acquired all knowledge, including sacred learning and the science of arms. Through his own unaided mental power, he possessed a bow called Aichegava, an impenetrable coat of mail, and numerous horn-tipped arrows. Indra himself placed Mandhada on the throne, and he conquered the three worlds in a righteous manner. Mandhada's reign was marked by numerous sacrifices, generous gifts to the priests, and the construction of sacred piles. He also performed pious deeds, sending forth his fight to conquer the earth, sea, and all cities. The sacrificial grounds prepared by him were found throughout the land, and he gave 10,000 padmas of kine to the Brahmanas. When a drought lasted for 12 years, Mandhada caused rain to fall, paying no heed to Indra's protests. He also slew the mighty ruler of Gandhara, born in the Leonard dynasty, who was as terrible as a roaring cloud. Mandhada protected the four orders of people and kept the worlds from harm through his austere and righteous life. Lamasa concluded his narration by describing the spot where Mandhada sacrificed to the gods, situated in the midst of the Kuru field. Yudhishthira listened with rapt attention, and Vaisampayana requested Lomasa to narrate more stories about. In the court of King Yudhishthira, a curious inquiry was made by the king himself, O best of speakers. He said to Lomasa, what was the extent of power and strength possessed by King Sanaka? I am desirous of hearing an exact account of his deeds and of his power. Lomasa, with his wise and knowing eyes, began to recount the tale of King Samika. There was a virtuous king named Samika, he said, who had 100 wives, all suitably matched to their husband. He took great care, but could not succeed in getting a single son from any one of them. A long time elapsed, during which he continued a sonless menace. The years went by. King Sanaka grew old and desperate, for ere one day, while his wives were surrounding him with gifts and offerings, Athenian sung their young son Jantu at his hip. The child's piercing scream echoed through the palace, causing distress among the mothers, and a tumultuous noise that reached the ears of the king himself. Samaka was immediately informed of the commotion in the female apartments. He rose from his throne, accompanied by his ministers and family priest, and hastened towards the same. Upon arriving, he soothed his son's pain, and then withdrew with his attendants. The king's concern for Jantu only deepened as he reflected on the fragility of life. On having only a single son, he exclaimed to his family priest, considering how constantly liable to decease are all organized beings, to have an only son is but a trouble. He lamented that despite his efforts and the union with 100 wives, he had yet to see a single son. The king's words were laced with despair as he turned to his family priest for guidance. O Brahmana, O my lord, he implored, with the view that I might have many sons born to me. This century of wives hath been wedded by me after inspection, and after I had satisfied myself that they would prove suitable to me. But issue they have none. He asked if there was any ceremony that could grant him 100 sons. The family priest, wise and knowing, replied, there is a ceremony by virtue of which a man may get a century of sons. If thou art able to perform it, O Samaka, then I shall explain it to thee. Samaka's eyes lit up with hope as he responded, whether it be a good or an evil deed, the ceremony by which 100 sons may be born may be taken by thee as already performed. Let thy blessed self explain it to me. The family priest began to outline the ritual. A sacrifice would be set on foot, and Jantu, his only son, would have to be offered as an oblation. The king listened intently. In a distant land, King Samaka stood before his trusted Brahmana priest Lomasa with a fervent desire burning in his heart. He yearned for a multitude of sons to carry on his legacy, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen with utmost devotion. He implored the wise priest, whatever is to be performed, I beseech you, do precisely as it may be necessary, as I am desirous of having a number of sons. I shall do all that may be prescribed by thee. The Brahmana's words were laced with gravity and solemnity as he began the ritual sacrifice. A young boy named Jantu was chosen as the victim, and his mothers, overcome with grief, tried to snatch him away from the officiating priest. They wailed in despair, clutching their child tightly, but the priest held firm his grip unyielding. The air was filled with the anguished cries of the women, like a chorus of female ospreys screaming in agony. As the ritual progressed, the priest pulled Jantu away from his mothers, and despite their frantic attempts to save him, he was ultimately killed and offered as a burnt sacrifice. The mothers' anguish reached its peak when they caught sight of the sizzling fat being prepared for offering. Overwhelmed by the pungent smell, they soon falling to the ground in a state of deep unconsciousness. Yet fate had ordained that this sacrifice would yield an unexpected reward. 10 months later, a full century of sons
was born to King Sameke, each one conceived by his devoted wives. Among them stood Janda, the eldest and most beloved son, adorned with the golden mark on his back, a symbol of his exceptional merit. Years passed, and as Sameke's reign came to an end, he beheld the terrible fate that had befallen his family. Priest, the Brahmana, was being grilled in a hellish torment, tormented by the very flames that had once fueled their sacred ritual. Sameke's heart went out to his devoted servant, and he demanded to know why this calamity had befallen him. The priest, his body scorched by the fire, revealed the truth. This is the outcome of my having officiated in that sacrifice of thine. The king was devastated, realizing that his actions had led to his loyal servant's suffering. He pleaded with Dharmaraja, the god who metes out punishments to departed souls, to release his priest from this torment, but Dharmaraja would not be swayed. One cannot enjoy or suffer for another person's acts. He declared, these are the fruits of the acts. See it here. Sameke was undeterred, insisting that without his loyal Brahmana by his side, he had no desire to enter the blessed realms. He yearned to share in the consequences of their.
As Lomasa stood before King Yudhishthira, he began to recount a tale of great devotion and spiritual significance. Here, O king, he said, his voice filled with reverence, the Lord of all beings himself performed the ancient ritual of Vishakrita, which spanned an incredible 1,000 years. The king's eyes widened as Lomasa continued, and Ambarisha, son of Naviga, offered sacrifices near the sacred Yamuna river. He gave 10 padmas, golden coins, to his attendant priests, and achieved the highest success. Through his devotion, Lomasa led the king to a spot where Yeyatai, the mighty monarch, had once performed his sacrificial rites. The ground was dotted with places for various forms of sacrificial fires, and the earth seemed to be subsiding under the weight of Yeyatai's pious works. Behold this summit tree, Lomasa said, pointing to a small singular leafed branch, and this is an excellent lake. The king's eyes roamed over the landscape, taking in the serene beauty of the surroundings. As they walked further, they came across lakes created by Parajurma and the hermitage of Narayana. Lomasa pointed out the path, followed by Richaka's son, who had wandered the earth, practicing yoga rites in the river Rapia. The king listened intently, his mind absorbing the tales of ancient Hera. Suddenly a strange figure appeared before them, a Paisaka woman adorned with pestles for ornaments. She spoke to a Brahmana woman, having eaten curd and Yuganhara, and lived in Achutasthala. You should live with your sons. The king's curiosity was piqued as Lomasa translated her words. She says that if we spend the night here, our experiences will be different from those of the day. He explained. The king looked at Lomasa, his eyes filled with a sense of wonder and awe. This is indeed a sacred spot, he said. At this very place, Yeyatai, son of Nahusha, performed sacrificial rites and made gifts of precious gems. Indra's pleasure with those rituals was evident in the peaceful atmosphere that surrounded them. Lomasa continued to guide the king through the landscape, pointing out a holy bathing place on the Yamuna river known as Plechavetarana. Men of cultured minds call it the entrance to the region of heaven, he said. The king listened intently, his mind drinking in the tales of ancient heroes and their devotions. They reached the spot where King Parrot had performed sacrificial rites. Lomasa explained that the monarch had celebrated a horse sacrifice by setting free the intended victim, a majestic steed with a coat checkered with black. The king's eyes widened as he took in the tale of Merida, who, as Lomasa stood before King Desiratha, he gazed out at the sacred landscape with reverence. O son of Bara's race, he began, this is a place where mortals have breathed their last and gone to heaven. He pointed to the spot where Decha had pronounced his blessing thousands of years ago, when he was engaged in a great sacrifice. The king's eyes widened as Lomasa led him to the banks of the beautiful river Saraswati. Here is the sacred Tirtha, Lomasa said, where the goddess disappeared into the earth and later reappeared at Chamashadita. The king watched in awe as Lomasa showed him the gate of the kingdom of the Nishadis, where the Saraswati had hidden from their hatred, and here she is joined by other sacred rivers. Lomasa continued flowing seawards to bring blessings to all who cometh. They walked along the river bank. Lomasa pointed out the spot known as Sindhu, where Lopamudra had accepted Agastya as her lord. The king's eyes shone with wonder at the mention of Indra's favored spot, Pravasa, which removed all sins, and yonder, Lomasa said, gesturing towards the distant region, is visible the sacred land of Vishnu for the king and his brothers. followed Lomasa to the banks of the Vipasa river, where Vaisesa had once thrown himself into its waters in grief for his sons, and when he rose from the water, Lomasa said with a smile, he was unfettered. The king's eyes sparkled as he gazed out at the sacred region of Kashmir, frequented by holy sages as they continued their journey. Lomasa pointed out the spot where Ignai and Kesipa had held a conference, and where Nash his son had met with the sage